Good afternoon and welcome to our recording of a Brighton landscape. The landscape and the soil and water that underpins this is what makes up the special qualities of both the City Downland Estate and the Southlands National Park. As a result, and early in our preparatory and research work for the City Downland Estate plan, it became clear to us if the Council was to successfully deliver on their carbon net zero initiative, landscape would have to be a key consideration and component, in addition to other natural capital attributes of the estate, for any future plan. In order to develop our thinking and understanding of this particular component of the whole estate plan, we have commissioned landscape architect Kim Wilkie to offer a view on what a Brighton landscape could look like for future generations to come, say in 100 years from now. Kim ran his own practice for 25 years and now works as a strategic and conceptual landscape consultant. He collaborates with architects and landscape architects from around the world and combines designing with the muddy practicalities of running a small farm in Hampshire, where he is now based. Kim studied history at Oxford and landscape architecture at the University of California before setting up his own landscape studio in London in 1989. He continues to teach and lecture in America, writes optimistically about land and place from Hampshire, and medals in various national committees on landscape and environmental policy in the UK. Current projects are focused on regenerative farming combined with human settlement, both in England and in North America. Kim also sits on the National Park Authority's Design Review Panel. Welcome, Kim. We look forward to hearing your view on Brighton landscape.
Thank you, Keith. It's a real honour and pleasure to work on this landscape, which is one of the most rich and dynamic and interesting in England. And on the screen, you can see here how much of the land is owned by Brighton and Hove City Council, who had the rare wisdom to buy up this land, nearly 15,000 acres, over a century ago, in order to protect the aquifer and the water supply to the city. And in that whole landscape, there is a wonderful history as well as an extraordinary future. You can see on this map from the end of the 19th century how Brighton has spread out from that small core beside the coast into the land almost to the A27, and how important it is to understand the history of this landscape and how little vegetation and woodland there was on that landscape a century ago, and how we take it forward to the next 100 years. And the crucial things within this are to understand the rarity and the specialness of the landscape that's rooted in its geology and its hydrology, and in the wildlife and the soils that support this richness of landscape. But also to understand that people are a big part of this landscape and have been for several thousand years, and still really enjoy it as part of the city hinterland. And so what I'm not going to do is say exactly what we should do for the next 100 years, but to highlight the issues and the points where we can really understand where these things will make a difference and what our options are to take it forward. And so just to start with, it is a very beautiful and moving landscape, looking from the downs right out to the coast, and then behind, looking at places like Devil's Dyke, the drama of that landscape, and behind that, the Weald and the flat, rich agricultural land. But from the downs to the coast is something very rare, very special, and a crucial part of the Southlands National Park. And within that, one is very aware of the climate, of the wind and the weather coming off the channel into that landscape, and how the hedgerows reflect the speed of that wind, and also allow birds to take refuge there, sheep to take refuge underneath it, and crucially to make us particularly aware that in the coming century, storm events and what we do with climate is one of the biggest things that we face. How we can take carbon back into the soil, how we can protect water, how we can protect wildlife, and at the same time understand how people use that landscape. So in this past summer, during lockdown, having looked at how actively and peacefully at the same time people use that landscape, and getting an understanding of what it means for all of the walkers and the cyclists, and indeed for the people who are out for formal recreation as well, for golf and horses, and the sport in terms of football and golf that's on the city land as well. So we're looking at wildlife and people and how the land is managed. There are elements which are managed very intensively with quite traditional chemical methods. And then there's the very traditional grazed pasture of cattle and sheep that is the way that the downs have been managed for thousands of years, and to understand how that might continue and what it contributes. And deep down, it's water and wildlife that are the crucial elements of this landscape. The chalk aquifer, the way that it cleans the water and stores it, is a key element to how we should think about this landscape for the next 100 years, and how that then supports the microbes, the insects, the birds and the butterflies that we really cherish here and make this such a special place. And within it, some extraordinary archaeology of dew ponds and field boundaries that are testimony to how man has survived on this landscape for thousands of years. And you can see in this archaeology the old Iron Age field patterns that are still there in the bones of the land, and how important it is both to keep those grazed and open and not allow the gorse completely to conceal that old archaeology. But there are still great parts of this landscape which are so well managed with grazing that you do get this fabulous combination of chalk, downland wildflowers, and the insects and the butterflies that go along with that. And that, I think, has to be a key goal for how the land is managed into the future. It is a very, very popular landscape, not only for Brighton and Hove, but also for the South Downs Way that runs through it. And there are opportunities for making more and offering more from the South Downs Way. There are sites which are particularly popular, like the Chattree Memorial, and offer new possibilities for education and interpretation. Places like the Ferndown Tower, and also in the long-term future, the firing range might also be a place of education and interpretation. And along with that, just to the east, northeast of Brighton is Castle Hill. And you can see from the contours here what an extraordinary flowing landscape it is, although it has been rather cut about by ploughing and arable land. And within that, at the base of that, just here, you can see the Ballsdean farm buildings, which are now derelict, but could also offer a really good site for interpretation and education. And then the real gateway to the national park from Brighton and Hove, Stanmer Park, a really beautiful landscape, and really the only wooded part of the whole landscape that has survived through for centuries. And within that, you see the church and the house nestled within the trees and looking down over that grass downland to the house. And it was always meant to be nestled like that, the house and the church seen together. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see how the landscape flowed up to the beech clumps and the downland beyond. And within that, the orchards, the tradition of growing food there and grazing the land well could work extremely well for the Brighton local food initiative. There are redundant farm buildings as well as the cafe where much more could be made of a local food market, particularly related to Stanmore Organics and all of the work that's going on in the gardens adjacent to that, those farm buildings. And so within the whole pattern, we also need to look at traffic, what the future of traffic is, and how bicycles, which have become more and more important, can coexist with the traffic, and where we can make bicycle routes much more friendly and less threatening, and where we can also make the roads less obvious into that landscape with patching together of hedgerows and the softening of the roads through the landscape. And particularly the car parks. You can see that glinting golf course car park from miles away, and just a hedge along the road there and a few trees, particularly the National Trust car park, a tree in the middle of that mound would make a massive difference to how intrusive those car parks are and how pleasant they are to use. The A27 on the whole is really beautifully nestled within woodland and doesn't intrude into the landscape nearly as badly as it might. Another area to look at is the whole question of what the land is used for. Horticulture and stables are prevalent around the edge of the city, but they aren't very good for the land and they aren't all that sympathetic to wildlife. So within these hard choices that we have to make, we also need to think about how the city itself interacts with that landscape. The top slide there looks at the city from Stanmore Park, and you can't really see it. It's beautifully folded in wooded valleys like that. You get a little bit closer and you can see how the buildings are poking through the trees, but they are settled well into that. Where you don't get a wooded backdrop, the houses really jar with that landscape and are silhouetted against it, and are also much more subject to wind. The university expansion on the whole has followed that pattern, but you can see at the top where there are white porter cabins that they really stand out, and when those go, softening that development in with trees is pretty crucial. You're also very aware of how white stands out in a landscape, so the more that the buildings are darker and settle into that landscape, the better. And within the city itself, great areas of gang-mown grass are probably bad for the environment, not very sympathetic for wildlife, and use up a lot of diesel and gang mowers. And so deciding where to plant trees within the city on those grass areas is going to be another area of interest. And something like the Ditchling Road there, whether more tree planting in that particular location would be better than mowing the grass. And then there's a really, on the whole, the interesting thing is that extensively managed pasture that's lightly grazed or properly grazed has managed to sequester carbon into the ground even faster than trees do. And on the whole, it's a landscape that shouldn't be wooded. It is more about open grass chalkland. But there is this interesting area along Warren Road, And down here where you can see that there is some woodland that's down here and around here, but that if we were to extend that woodland so that it all linked up through here, you'd get something at a landscape scale that would really work. When you look back at Bevan Dean, you can see how well that works, where the houses are silhouetted against woodland or hidden by woodland, but where they begin to poke out and haven't got trees behind them, they become more intrusive. And if one could then extend this belt of trees so that it linked up with Chalky Downs Farm there, it would have a continuity and a scale within that landscape that could be much more harmonious. Similarly, as the downland flows down to the university, there's this very harsh edge against that beautiful topography. And it would be possible there to think about a dew pond at the bottom of that valley and softening the edges of the woodland and potentially not ploughing that and using it for arable land at all. Because the sheltered valleys are some of the most special places, particularly when the wind is at its most severe. And they're great places to walk. They're good places for chalk grassland and for taking refuge from the coastal wind. And the trees that grow there are not very many. Sycamores do fantastically, hawthorn does very well. We're worried about the future of elms, but if we can get disease-resistant elms, that would be tremendous. But the real question is what we do on the steep slopes. Arable land is not a good way of dealing with those. And you can see here that that's a very steep slope, and beside it where you've still got scrub and some trees, it's a better way of dealing with those edges. Similarly, where at the Chattree Memorial, where you have a sudden cut-off of these, it would be much better in landscape scale to consider how that would flow with the whole side of the valley through there. And it is a valley of a landscape of beautiful valley forms, which you get at dawn and dusk when the light and the shadows really show it up. And how we work with that, with the land management, with scrub, with woodland, and not with arable land. So on the scrub or woodland issue, again, it's a question of how you manage it. And it's such a rare and important resource that one answer isn't going to be correct for all of it. There will be places where we should keep it completely grazed, places where it should be allowed to grow to scrub for a time, and then places where that scrub can be managed by cattle or by sheep, or allowed to go to woodland. This is interesting, the kind of trees that would naturally grow on these downland slopes. This is at Old Winchester Hill, where it's actually white beam and yew, and what species of trees we use, how we manage it. These are the issues that we need to decide upon. What I suggest we shouldn't do is allow scrappy areas of farmland against the grain of the natural landscape. It should flow with the landscape, so the whole hilltop or valley bottom should be of a continuous kind of farming. A lot of this landscape is farmed extremely well, but there are arbitrary edges, and it won't take much to sort that out in terms of management. Because deep down, grazing and farming this in the way that it has been managed for thousands of years is the secret to keeping this landscape as interesting in terms of wildlife and botany as it is. And where you do get properly grazed, sensitively grazed valleys and contours, you have the richest of wildflowers and insects that go along with that, an incredibly beautiful landscape. So in summary, it is a very special place of grazed downland, wooded settlement, and open coast. And if we understand how those downs, what makes them so special, and how we can manage them into the future, we will come up with a plan that reflects the topography, reflects how the water can sink into that aquifer, and comes up with the healthiest, microbially richest soils, and also creates a place which is one of the finest of cities with its hinterlands in the whole of Britain. Thank you very much.
Kim, thank you. That was fascinating. We're very grateful to you for sharing your Brighton landscape with us today. And I look forward to discussing it with you further as the whole estate project progresses. Thank you very much.